delighted that you could join us and really excited to be a part of this conversation with Evie Shockley, whom I've known for years from when I lived in New York, and Alison Saar, with whom I'm newly acquainted, but whose work I've known for a long time. Alison Saar, whose works we'll see up here, and if you haven't looked up her work, please do, creates artworks that frequently transform found objects to reflect themes of cultural and social identity, history, and religion. Saar credits her mother, the amazing artist, acclaimed collagist, assemblage artist, Betty Saar, with exposing her to metaphysical and spiritual traditions. And I keep thinking about the story you told me of your favorite book as a child, which I think is actually very telling to your predictive of your collaborative work later. But and assisting her father, Richard Saar, a painter and art conservator, in his restoration shop, inspired her learning and curiosity about other cultures. Saar studied studio art and art history at Scripps College in Claremont, California, receiving a BA in art history. She completed an MFA from the Otis Art Institute in LA. She became artist in residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem, which is around the corner from where I used to live. She completed another residency in Roswell, New Mexico in 1985, which augmented her urban style with Southwest Native American and Mexican influences. Saar's style encompasses a multitude of personal, artistic, and cultural references that reflect the plurality of her own experiences. Her sculptures, installations, and prints incorporate found objects, including rough-hewn wood, old tin ceiling panels, nails, shards of pottery, glass, and urban detritus. The resulting figures and objects become powerful totems exploring issues of gender, race, heritage, and history. Saar's art is included in museums and private collections across the US. Evie Shockley, whose middle name I should know, has published multiple books of poetry, including The New Black, which came out via Wesleyan, who's her current publisher, winner of the Black Caucus of ALA's Literary Award for Poetry, and A Half-Read Sea from Carolina Arion Press, in addition to 2 chapbooks. This is not her newest title. Her newest title is forthcoming in 2023. And the title of the newest title? Suddenly We, yes. So one of her titles, Semi-Automatic, was published, and we'll hear from that collection, was published in September 2017, also from Wesleyan. She also has a book of criticism, Renegade Poetics, Black Aesthetics and Formal Innovation in African American Poetry. Shockley has had essays and reviews published in such journals as Callaloo, African American Review, and Indiana Review. Her poetry has appeared in Mellis, Harvard Review, Columbia Poetry Review, and in the anthology, Black Nature, 4 Centuries of African American Nature Poetry, among many other publications. Evie has sat on a number of panels and given many presentations at a variety of conferences, including MLA, the American Studies Association, the American Literature Association, so she truly is an artist, scholar. You're also the newly named
Zora Neale Hurston, Distinguished Professor.
All right. Evie has been incredibly busy. And she received the 2012 Theodore H. Holmes and Bernice Holmes' National Poetry Prize, awarded to a single poet of special merit by the faculty of Princeton University's Creative Writing Program. In 2018, she was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. And so to give you her academic lineage, she received a BA in English from Northwestern, followed by a JD from University of Michigan Law School, before earning her MA and PhD from Duke. There you go.
I like that. The end.
So, the end. So I thought, and we're going to share, they should actually have the mics, but, oh, you're going to pass that? Wow.
My hands are in my pockets, so.
So the first question that I have in my little script that I have to pull up asks, can you tell us a bit about the beginnings of your friendship, your initial collaborations? What brought you together? And I know that at some point in the list of questions, I asked that you read Tin Skin, and that you talk a bit about how Alison's Compton Nocturne was the sort of source of inspiration for you. And so I wonder how you move from inspiration to poem. That's a lot, but.
It's going to come to me, so you should start, or should I start?
How about you read Tin
I'll
Skin?
set up our meeting, and then I'll hand it over to you, and you can read it. How's that? It'll be like you can relive the moment.
Yes.
So I was invited to the Vermont Studio Center, which is a residency that invites young, actually artists of all age and poets of all ages, and they have artists that come and visit with the artists, and they have writers that come and visit with the writers. And so, I arrived there. The first night, I think, was Evie's reading, so everyone gets to present their work, and I sit down, and she looks up when she's about ready to read this piece and says, actually, this is a piece kind of inspired by my piece, Compton Nocturne, which will be cropping up somewhere in between here. But so I sat back and just had, it's like one of that Roberta Flack moment where you're like singing my life. And it was just instant love, right? So anyway, you can read it. How's that?
I will read it, and I just will say that the love had begun for me long before this moment, because Alison was already a collaborator with poets. I think I really first got to know your work through Arcade, which was your collaboration with Erica Hunt, exactly. And so, well, I'll read the poem and then I'll share a little bit of a backstory. Her tin skin. I want her tin skin. I want her militant Barbie breast, resistant, cupped, no, cocked in the V of her elbow. I want my curves mountainous and locked. I want her arabesque eyes. I want her tar markings, her curly cues. I want her tin skin. She is a tree, her hair a forest of strength. I want to be adorned with bottles. I want my brownness to cover all but the silver edges of my tin skin. My sculptor should have made me like her round-bellied maker hewed her, with chainsaw in hand, roughly. Cut away from me everything but the semblance of tender. Let nothing but my flexed foot, towing childhood, tell the night-eyed who know how to look what lies within. So, the story you have to know is on a day when I was feeling extremely vulnerable, I was visiting the Greensboro, North Carolina Museum, Greensboro University of North Carolina, Greensboro Museum of Art, and came upon this brilliant sculpture. Have you seen it yet? It's so, I mean, it's stunning. It's life-sized, literally a tree. And I fell in love with this sculpture, and I was sitting there with my notebook in hand, thinking about what could I say that would live up to the majesty of this piece. And the security guard became a instant docent, right? And started telling me, oh, Alison Saar, when she was making this piece, she was pregnant. She was really pregnant. And she, there was a film, I think, of you with a chainsaw hewing.
Poor babies.
And that had to make its way into the poem. And so I already knew your work, Alison, but that was my first chance to tangle with it in the most, admiring way.
Thank you. Well, I think what's so wonderful about having people respond to your work, and I think we're experiencing that on a regular basis, and I just seen in our conversations yesterday and today, is that, parts of the work is revealed to me. And I love that, that one line where you're seeing the silver edges of the tin, and in some ways it's like the chinks in the armor, and talking about being vulnerable and how you have this protection, but there's always access to get to you. And it was just, so thank you for bringing that back to me to see, which I didn't see in my own work, so. We're gonna get all modeling.
That's okay, there are cameras to capture it.
Let it all hang out.
Well, I would love, could you talk more about, there are a couple of things that came up. One, of course, is your collaboration. You don't know this, Erica Hunt is one of my best friends.
Oh, yeah.
And she literally saved my life.
Oh.
That's a story for cocktails.
Okay.
But what I would love to know is how, one of the kind of incredible things about your figures, to my mind, is how there's the sense of kind of dynamic gesture that's captured in medias res, and that gesture suggests something about identity and those things. So I'm wondering how Compton Nocturne, and now that I know you were sort of fiercely embodied in the sense of giving life to another person, what was the kind of inspiration for this figure, but also for many of them, that sense of a gesture that's captured in the middle of things?
Yeah, I think, the works are always kind of, because they're stationary and they cannot move, that for me, a gesture, whether it's by the hand, these sort of, often the question is these vacant eyes and whatnot, but, how do you kind of sort of communicate? Because they're also often about this sort of strength and vulnerability simultaneously. And of course, that's, who I am. You just said that you have your moments as well. And, how do you kind of have this bold face, still be human, still be feeling, still understand the mayhem and the horrors that are going on in the world, and be compassionate, but still have the ability to go forward. So I think that things like an extended hand is an invitation to come take this journey with me, or of course the Compton Nocturne is looking at, the traditional odalisque, which is traditionally, a very sort of provocative, vulnerable pose. But, I'm kind of turning that around, and I think the other piece, which we'll get towards the end of it, which is Set to Simmer, is also an odalisque, but they're very different in that one, maybe I was still kind of like being timid and tenuous in that sort of pose, but, later, now the work becomes very, that odalisque becomes very confrontational later on. And so, we just kind of experience the world and somehow try to put that through, and I think we see that so much in your work as well, in terms of...
Yeah, just trying to process and to I think both of us circle around the same subjects or the same set of subjects, and try to like show it from different angles. And I think that's one of the things that I like about thinking with visual art as a sort of a entree into writing, is that it reminds me, you know, even though I'm working with words, first of all, they have a life, a material life. They have shape. They take up the space of the page in the way that a canvas painter approaches a canvas, but also that, you know, I can think three-dimensionally, even though I'm working in a two-dimensional form, and I can think about sort of moving around a subject. I think visual art helps me, and especially yours, which is so, you know, larger than life often, and takes on such weighty subjects. It really reminds me that I can be in my body in a form of art that is thought of so often as being really heady, and you're only in your mind when you're writing. So, yeah.
So, I know, I wish I could yell. I'd have to pretend my sisters were here, and I could yell. I really am interested in the idea of embodiment in poetry, right? Particularly, as you say, there's this, or an embodiment in art, right? And what does that notion of embodiment bring up for someone who occupies a particular socio-political position, as you do? Why is it important to point to the body, to point to the messiness of flesh, rather than write about the rain that one doesn't feel?
You know you said a mouthful already.
I know. I'm sorry. I said I would keep them short.
No, I mean, it's such a great question. I mean, when I'm writing, I'm thinking about centuries of history that go back through the Enlightenment and beyond, in which, you know, a dichotomy has been set up between male and female, between white and black, between the rational and the emotional, between culture and nature, and you could just go on. And they map, not neatly, but very persistently onto one another. And I am always thinking in my work about how to just destroy that supposed binary, and not so much celebrate the flip side, the side that's not been privileged for so many years, but show how it's all in play for all artists for all the time. But to do that, I have to sort of really lean in to the side that gets diminished, marginalized, set aside. So, you know, to work with language in a way that foregrounds its materiality is one way to make a poem that might be about, I'm thinking about another poem I might read about, say, Black girlhood, not just a mental exercise, like real girls.
Yeah, and I guess when you posed that question, I was thinking more literally figurative figure. So, you know, my really early work was all abstract, and the work I was looking at was tankas and looking at Rothko and this idea of evoking the spirit through the abstract. And I found it really frustrating because I wasn't getting where I needed to go. And so I made my first sculpture, which is a piece called Si J'étais Blanc, which is a small black boy who opened his chest and you see Josephine Baker. And the song Si J'étais Blanc is, of course, her song, well, the song that she made famous about if she, were white, she would have opportunities. And all of a sudden, I came to this, I realized that through the figure was an entree, and that it was a space where people didn't feel like they weren't smart enough or educated enough. They could come up and they could see that a figure is somehow related to them, regardless of their color. But more so, a person of color, a female, person of color, female, black figure, definitely was accessible. And so, I started creating these forms and still trying to talk about these very emotional, abstract ideas. And it really served as just a tool to get people to step closer. And so that's kind of where I, landed on the figure. Of course, we went and saw a show today that was figurative artists working without figures. And I'm like, I may have to change this up.
What was the show?
At Moad, right?
Oh.
Yeah, it was pretty great. Yeah.
Wow. That's really wonderful. I am, okay, I'm going to do this.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
I know. Throw out some random quote. Aristotle says the body is the soul. And there's so much in what you've just said that suggests that, I feel like somehow what you've just said spoke to that, right? And that somehow the body, the figuration, is the means through which we get to know what the soul is and what might be beyond it. So I'm looking at the time. I'm trying to be responsible.
Do we need to look at the time?
Who's the, okay, timekeeper. I'm good. Okay. So
Can I say something to that before you, are you going to shift
yeah,
gears?
I was going to shift, but go
Okay,
ahead.
go for it.
Yes.
Well, I just think it leads so, I think it leads almost directly to the Mami Wata collaboration that we did.
Okay.
In the
Nice.
sense, the body is the soul, that Mami Wata is a figure that I had heard of, but that Alison really led me to study and spend time with, because she was working towards a project, an exhibition called Breach. And maybe you should introduce her. But I
Okay.
think that's a
All
great segue.
right. Yeah. So, unfortunately, there's always these long back stories to these things, so bear with me. And at some point, Breach, she's right on time. I had gone down to the Joan Mitchell Center in New Orleans, maybe 5, maybe 6 years after Katrina. And of course, we all recall the horrors. We're seeing similar things happening today in Kentucky, only not to that extreme. But, experiencing that and just being, totally dismayed. And then kind of looking back historically, because I wanted to speak to how a natural disaster was then profoundly impacted by racist policies, and how, it's one thing to be flooded, but it's another thing to be stranded on, in a stadium with no one to take care of you, nobody came. So I wanted to speak to that, but did not feel, my family left Louisiana many, many years ago, but did not feel that it was my time. I could not tell that story. But then I went back even further and looked at the Great Mississippi Flood of 1926, 27, and realized that this has been, the mode de jour for 80-something years, and now adding another 10 to 15 years on top of that. So I'd want to do this show, Breach, and kind of talking about Mami Wata, how, these diasporic Yamaya, Mami Wata, Yoruba goddesses, Orisha, came to the Americas, and how They then, dove into the Mississippi and on the coast and all of this stuff, and how they, those traditions were carried on. And so I was kind of, Mami Wata was someone that you could dance to, she could cleanse you, she could lave tête and cool your head, but she could also pull you asunder.
Yeah.
And so I was really intrigued with that sort of dance between danger and embracing and the gifts of Mami Wata. And so I came knocking on Evie's door, and we did a collaboration. So maybe you'll read some of them.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see.
There's a few prints, and they're also out in the lobby. But
Yes. Oh, please look at the book. What we ended up making together was an artist book that's three-dimensional. There are three sections to the poem that I wrote, and each of them was printed in a letterpress kind of context that is wonderful, maybe not quite as wonderful as this one, but another wonderful kind of letterpress opportunity to print on paper, on textile, and to bring Mami Wata to life in a visual way and a textual way simultaneously. I think I'll read the second section of the poem. If you see an image with one of Alison's very characteristic faces and a poem spilling out of her mouth, this is the section of the poem that's full title is Mami Wata, or How to Know a Goddess When You See One. Section 2 called Mami Speaks. You make me with wood and the fear-sharpened knife's edge. You make me with paint and awe. You carve me with snakes, spotted and diamond-backed. You wrap me in their tails or give me my own. You make me a ritual figure. I am the second story of your masks. You make me with fabric and fiber, with pigment and braid and thread. You make me with myth, fantasy, and affection. You make me with dreads and dread. You shape me from copper, cut me from patterned tin. You make me with borrowed cultures, with local need. You make me your tormentor and deliverer. I am the demon goddess of your home's floral and perfumed altar. I am the irresistible thief who flashes and fills your eyes with my full breasts before I rob you blind. You make me powerful as tides with rushing rivers of hair. You flood me with mystery and desire, so no wonder I do what you have given me to do.
you need to hold it up to show the.
So one of the things that I was surprised about, I was thinking if I'm collaborating with a visual artist, then I'm the words person, and the visual is coming from Alison. And Alison was like, no. That's not how it works. We worked together. We talked about Mami Wata and what her legacy meant. And but I also got to shape my poem. So it's shaped like a long extended mermaid's tail.
Mermaid's tail, right. One of her many forms. But and I think what was also fun about that was that we took some excerpts from that and printed them on water-soluble paper with the idea that it was kind of like, break glass in case of emergency, that if you needed Mami Wata, you take this poem and you sacrifice it to the river. And it's so beautiful because the water starts soaking into the paper, and then the words start drifting, and then the letters start drifting, and then the letters themselves start to dissolve, and so she kind of consumes them. So that was really fun. I don't know if anyone's actually sacrificed them.
I certainly haven't. But she's there if we need her.
Right, in case of emergencies.
That's That's really amazing. I mean, it's interesting in that poem, Evie, the sort of assemblage of things that are brought together. And I think of that sense that you can't disentangle Black majesty from Black misery. And that there's some way that Mama Wata sits at the kind of the heart of that, right? It's the figure of that, an understanding of that. One question I have about the collaboration, and you began to get at it when you say, okay, you're not, the words are also image in some way. But how has your particular practice been influenced by by collaboration with Alison? And Alison, how has your practice been influenced or changed through collaboration with Evie or with other writers in particular? Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good question. I think what I love about it is it really gives me, it's been a real gift for opening up. You know, I think as artists, anyone in their own art sometimes kind of puts these boundaries and walls around it, and by hearing her work, by hearing her speak not only of my art, but also Romare Bearden and Sun Ra and all these other amazing musicians, and seeing how she just broadens everything she comes to. And so it was really inspiring to kind of give me the courage to kind of step out of my own comfort zone. You know, I still don't use words in my work, but I love, and I think that's what kind of attracts me to your work and why we're able to kind of collaborate so nicely, is because they're both assembling. So, you know, you with words and you with materials, and you had kind of alluded to this question earlier, that, you know, it's a cobbling together of things, and by bringing those things, some of them really, you know, unpredictable and incongruous, that you create a third thing through that. And so I think that was really a powerful lesson that I've learned from your work. So.
Oh my gosh. I'm sitting here going, you were fully formed before you ever met me. But, but you know, it's just, thank you. You know, I think I talked a little bit about it before in a general sense, that that thinking with visual art sort of puts me in my body and in a three-dimensional space of practice. But I think Alison's work in particular, I mean, what draws me to your work is, you mentioned earlier, just in passing, the vacant eyes is what you said. And it's, when I say, you know, a classic or a characteristic Alison face, I mean, there are these eyes that I would know your work anywhere. But they're anything but vacant. I mean, I think something that your work teaches me about is the lesson that I think we're often wanting people to learn, and this goes to some of the things that you've been talking about, Tonya, that things that look vacant or that we assume are vacant are not empty. I mean, it's terra nullis, right?
It's the black hole.
It's the black hole. It's things that need to be discovered. It's not vacant. And your eyes, among other things about your art, invite people to see themselves or to imagine what lies within, to quote myself, right? You know, that idea of what lies within. I mean, to look beyond the surface. And that's a challenge to my writing that I embrace.
Well, it's curious. I mean, talking about the vacant eyes, you know, initially I had started doing these drawing collages of what I kind of considered sort of quote unquote sideshow posters, and thinking specifically of Sajid Bartman and the abuse she suffered by being put on display, and how to try to understand what she was experiencing. And you may have know her as the Hottentot Venus, which is one of the titles they slapped on her, ridiculous notions of, this exotic creature. And so when I started doing those, the blank eyes was basically a way of not returning the gaze, and basically a way that I am in this position, I may not be able to escape this predicament, and you may look at me, but you cannot own me, and you cannot, I will not dignify this abuse with a return gaze. So it started there, but then it turned into mask. And then part of this vacancy is also an invitation for the viewer to step inside that body as well. So, over the 30 years I've been making these things, they've evolved even within my own work, or my understanding of it. The form is the same, but my understanding of it changes. That's how we keep from getting bored, right?
And layers that only some are allowed in. I mean, that one gets to choose who enters and who does not. That's right. Wow. So I'm sorry, I am watching the time. I'm notoriously late all the time. So I'm feeling the pressure. So I wanted us to talk about, and you've already begun going there, but one question I had is, could you share with us some of your future collaborations, and both ones that you have lined up in the actual calendar and ones that you wish for?
What do you say about that?
Well, I mean, there's a very nascent project. Extremely. Like
yesterday, or
yeah.
maybe a few weeks ago when we saw each other in New York.
But, I guess it won't hurt. I'm one who doesn't like to talk out projects, but I think it is safe to say, and no surprise to anyone who would know me, that I've been thinking a lot about the full weight of the Roe decision, recent handing down from the Supreme Court of the idea that women's bodies are not their own to determine the fate of, the purpose of, the function of. And I'm very, I'm thinking long term about that, but I am in the short term thinking about how to make art that will both speak to some of the emotion, some of the political goals that I have, and also potentially raise money to stand in the gap in the meantime for people who are going to be, people younger than myself who are going to be materially impacted, desperately damaged by that decision. So I mentioned to Alison that if we, had the chance to collaborate again, that might be a topic to explore in one way or another.
Right. Yeah, and then of course, we started looking at the history of women's, Black women specifically, having the choice taken away from them. As I started thinking of the sable Venus being sold as, of not only sexual import, but also a breeder and a commodity. Her sexualization and her womb becomes, a tool to create others. So, and then I was also interested in historically slave women rebelling against that and giving themselves herbal abortions and sometimes murdering their own children to the extent that they don't want their children to have to live the life that they live of being enslaved. So it's really dark. And, not to put darkness upon darkness, but, this is what we're feeling. And so, yeah, I'm sure it'll be the bestseller. You all want this hanging
As
on your
always.
wall.
Well, part of it is to imagine something different.
Yes.
That's one of the things that I love about art generally, is that it's a space for critique, but it's also a space for imagining and bringing into being
A way out, a way
a
up.
vision.
Right.
Yeah, way out, a way
Yeah,
up.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what our time is like, but I would love for Evie to read something out of your top. Is that okay?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm just
please.
like
No.
throwing that out there.
Well, okay, so, okay, so, did you put an image?
One of them here.
Oh, okay, so high cotton, these are 5 amazing images of the figure Topsy from Uncle Tom's Cabin, right? If you haven't read the novel, you could read it, or you could also read the Cliff Notes. I mean, it's history. It's a history, and it's a novel that is credited with inspiring enough abolitionist sentiment to engender the Civil War. So there's that. But it is also a novel that's filled with a liberal racism in which a figure that is supposed to represent black girlhood is just a stereotype, a caricature, right? And so Alison and I discovered that we had independently been thinking about the Topsy figure. I'll let you talk about high cotton maybe in some more detail. But seriously, I love what you did with Topsy. But I had been writing a series of poems that I called the Topsy Suite, one of which is called Topsy in Wonderland. So from one literary classic to another, if you've read Alice in Wonderland and also the Adventures Through the Looking Glass, you will recognize a different version of those experiences when Topsy entered that space. And so this is just a single excerpt from a longer poem that's made up of excerpts from Topsy in Wonderland, which the whole point is Alison agreed to illuminate the poem for me in semi-automatic. So I've got her beautiful Topsies interspersed with my words. So this is from Topsy in Wonderland. I should experience freedom far better, said Topsy to herself, if I could get to the mountaintop. And here's a path that leads directly to it. At least, no, it doesn't do that after going a few yards along the path and turning several sharp corners. But I suppose it will get me free at last. How curiously it twists. It's more like gerrymandering than meandering. Well, this turn goes to the mountaintop, I suppose. No, it doesn't. This goes directly back to the big house. Well, then, I'll try another way. And so she did, wandering up and down, trying tactic after tactic, but always coming back to the big house, do what she would. Indeed, once when Topsy turned a corner rather more quickly than usual, she ran against it before she could stop herself. I'm not going back in. I know I should have to go back through the looking glass again, back into the old box, and there'd be an end of all my efforts to escape. So, resolutely turning her back upon the big house, Topsy set out once more through the system, determined to keep right on until she got to the mountaintop. For a few years, all went on well. And she was just saying, I really will do it this time, when the path gave a sudden twist and the system shook itself, and the next moment she found herself actually walking in through the big house door. Oh, fuck the bullshit, Topsy cried. I never saw such a house for getting in the way. Never. However, there was the mountaintop in full sight. So there was nothing to be done but start again.
And isn't that so apropos for where we are now, right? Like, we are back at game one. And you wrote that, that's been 5, 6 years ago. Little did we know, we thought we were on our way out, right? We had a president that we loved, and yeah. So at any rate, round and round we go. Yeah.
You want to say anything about your Topsy?
My Topsy, well, specifically, well, this one, you know, of course, comes maybe more directly from the story where little Evie is lying on her deathbed and all of the slaves have gathered round to bid her farewell, and she's handing out strands of her blonde hair, which people have written represents Christianity and the good way and saving the slave souls through Christianity. And so I imagined that Topsy, fuck this, to quote you, recognizes the power in her blonde hair, and instead of accepting a few strands, she decides she's just going to take the whole scalp. So, of course, always kind of fallen back on my, you know, core humanities curriculum from Scripps College. Had to go back to, you know, the classics and Jason and, you know, and the Golden Fleece and all of that. So, you know, that's kind of where that piece. But the other thing that came back, and I always get kind of emotional when I'm talking about this, was, you know, this was really just the beginning of a really visible moments of the Black Lives Matter movement. And of course, it was the recording that Diamond Filano Castillo's girlfriend had on her phone with her daughter in the back, you know, who, of course, I think she's 4, was there when they murdered her, you know, her mother's boyfriend. And you can hear her saying, I don't want you to get shooted, Mommy. I don't want you to get shooted. And so for me, I mean, having had children, but regardless, it said, how do these children survive that? How do you somehow push beyond this trauma and become a whole person, not just go mad? I mean, it's just like, it's topsy-turvy, right? That this world is turned upside down, that law enforcement, you know, this sort of idea that they are to serve and protect are basically just murdering men, women, and children. So that's what, you know, I kind of said, well, I'm going to arm these little girls, and that's what the high cotton piece was, that they have taken the tools of their trade. So they have a sickle for rice, and a cotton bale hook for cotton, and a tobacco knife for tobacco, and a cane knife for sugar, and a hoe for indigo. So they've taken these tools as their weapons, and they're coming after you.
They're serious girls.
They're kick-ass girls, yeah. So,
And they're
anyway.
saving their own lives. I mean, that they're the way they are, the positions, they're almost like soldiers, actually. And that they're armed with these things as a kind of defense and offense. And it's funny because often Black girls are seen as aggressive and armed, even if they have implements of farming or nothing at all in their hands. Yeah. So I think I have to turn it over to you for questions.
Yeah, because
I
we'll just
do
go
have
on
another
forever.
question.
Sorry.
But perhaps, is Ted taking this or you taking
Well,
it?
I would just encourage anyone that has a question to raise their hand, and we'll call on you. We'll take just a few questions before signing off here.
How to get on the distribution list for when you're publishing your next collection?
Oh, well, I don't know. Depends on who wants to take it up.
Yeah. It's very nascent.
Very nascent, but if, you have an Instagram, no?
Twitter.
A Twitter, so
Yeah.
you can Twitter that, or you can Instagram this, and we will post it when it happens.
Yeah, for
You may have to be patient. Thank you.
I just love how poetic your art is and how visual your poetry is. And knowing that it's so evocative, as each of us bring our own experience to it as viewers, do you have an ideal audience in mind when you're working? And if it's the kick-ass girls or whoever it is, and how do you make sure that you reach them working within all of these different institutions?
What was the last part?
How do you make sure you reach that ideal audience if you have someone in mind when you're working?
Okay. I mean, I think about audience a lot, and I think I'm one of the. I think I'm one of the, maybe a minority of poets who finds thinking about audience a really generative thing rather than a limitation or a constraint. I'm interested, I talk about audience often as like maybe ideal people who have read all the things I've read, listened to all the music I've listened to, you know, seen all the art that I've seen, and who are just going to get everything. But then beyond ideal, there's maybe an intended audience, which might be people who I want to reach out to a little bit, right? And beyond that, there are like actual audiences and unintended but welcome audiences, right? And I do think about, it's not something that's a formula that I could describe, but I'm always thinking about how to create a piece that's layered enough that whether you're getting, say, 5 layers of the poem, 3, or just 1, there's something in it for as many people as possible. You know, I mean, obviously, language is a barrier. I'm sort of unhappy sometimes with how U.S.-centric my poetry is, and my forthcoming book only begins to try to push against that, but I feel like I still have a long way to go. But I hope the kick-ass girls find their way and find something in it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the most exciting audience, and you know, part of why I do public work is because this is just people walking by can sit down and ponder it, or just keep walking, sort of thing. But I think, you know, it's really exciting for me as an audience that doesn't know, you know, who I am, or you know, what traditions I'm coming out of, or what traditions I'm pointing to, and that they can just come there and experience it and understand it through their own lens and their own experience. And so, you know, I used to, you know, when I was in school, they said, well, what kind of art do you want to make? And I said, oh, you know, art that can be universally understood, which is a tall order, but, you know, I think and it's not so much saying this is what this piece is about and this is what I want you to glean from it. I love that you can come, that you can, you know, anyone that, you know, has the ability to read,
Yes.
or to hear, or to, you know, understand sign language, ASL, or other things, that anyone that can access the work can understand it through some experience. I mean, it may not be your telling, but that they can somehow connect with, you know, there's such richness in your work, that there is always an entree. And so that's what's most exciting to me, when work that you have nothing in common with somehow pulls you and brings you in. So,
Yeah.
Cool.